The thick document landed on the table with a thud that seemed to echo through the small apartment. Zara stared at it, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The man across from her, tall, imposing, with cold eyes that assessed everything as if calculating its worth, waited for her signature. She felt sick. This wasn't a marriage proposal, it was a business transaction. Her freedom in exchange for enough money to save her mother's life. $2 million for the hospital bills, the specialized treatment, everything that stood between her mother and death. All Zara had to do was sign her life away to a man she despised, a man who saw her as nothing more than another acquisition. The terms are fair, Alexander Reed said, his voice deep and emotionless. Your mother receives the best medical care money can buy. You become my wife for a minimum of 3 years. If you leave before then, all financial support ends immediately. Zara's fingers trembled as she reached for the pen. 3 years of her life. 3 years pretending to be the loving wife of a cold, arrogant billionaire who probably saw her as nothing more than a convenient solution to silence the board members pushing him to settle down. Why me? She asked, the question that had been burning inside her since his lawyer had approached her 2 weeks ago. You could have anyone. His dark eyes met hers. You're intelligent, educated, presentable, and most importantly, desperate enough to agree to my terms without complications. I need a wife, not a gold digger who will cause scandals or demand emotional involvement. The bluntness stung, but she couldn't argue with his assessment. Her mother's medical bills had left her drowning in debt, working 3 jobs and still falling short every month. The experimental treatment that might save her mother's life was completely out of reach, until now. And what about children? Zara asked, the words bitter on her tongue. Not part of our agreement, he replied coldly. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. Zara nodded, a small relief in the middle of this nightmare. At least she wouldn't have to bear this man's children. With a deep breath, she signed her name on every marked line, feeling as if she were signing away pieces of herself with each stroke of the pen. The wedding will be in 2 weeks. Small, private, but convincing, Alexander stated, gathering the papers. My assistant will contact you with details. I've arranged for your mother's transfer to the private medical center tomorrow morning. Zara nodded numbly. And where will we live? My penthouse, of course. You'll have your own room, he added, as if granting a generous favor. I expect you to accompany me to business functions, charity events, and appear as my devoted wife in public. What happens behind closed doors is irrelevant, as long as there's no hint of scandal. The thought of pretending to love this cold, calculating man made her stomach turn. But she thought of her mother, of the pain etched on her face during the last hospital visit, and strengthened her resolve. I understand, she said quietly. Alexander stood, towering over her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, perhaps doubt or even a hint of regret, but it vanished so quickly Zara convinced herself she had imagined it. The car will pick you up tomorrow at noon. Pack your essentials. Anything else you need can be purchased later. And with that, he left, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. Zara sat alone in her tiny apartment, the contract on the table before her, and allowed herself one moment of weakness. A single tear slid down her cheek as she whispered, I'm sorry, Mama. I hope this sacrifice is worth it. She had no idea that this business arrangement would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Zara stood in the massive bedroom that was now hers, surrounded by more luxury than she had seen in her entire life. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of one of the tallest buildings in the city, with views that stretched for miles. Her room alone was bigger than her entire apartment, with a bathroom that featured a shower large enough for 4 people and a bathtub that resembled a small pool. She ran her fingers over the silk bedspread, feeling completely out of place. Her few belongings looked pitiful in the massive walk-in closet, occupying just one small corner of the space designed to hold a wardrobe worth more than she would earn in 10 years. A knock at the door startled her. Come in, she called, quickly wiping her eyes. A woman in her 50s entered, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture perfect. Miss Zara, I'm Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. Mr. Reed asked me to inform you that your mother's transfer went smoothly. She's now settled at the Hillcrest Medical Center. Relief flooded through Zara. Thank you. When can I see her? The car is ready whenever you wish to visit. Mr. Reed has instructed that you have full access to the driver at all times. At least he was keeping that part of the bargain. I'd like to go now if possible. Mrs. Chen nodded. Of course. Also, Mr. Reed has scheduled several appointments for you tomorrow. The stylist, personal shopper, and etiquette coach will arrive at 9. Zara stiffened. Etiquette coach? Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral. Mr. Reed feels it would be beneficial for you to understand the social expectations of your new position. Of course he did. He'd bought himself a wife, and now he wanted to make sure she was properly polished before showing her off. Fine, Zara said tersely. Is there anything else? Dinner will be served at 7. Mr. Reed may be late, but he asked that you dine in the main room regardless. After Mrs. Chen left, Zara grabbed her purse and headed down to the waiting car. The driver, a middle-aged man named Thomas, greeted her with a respectful nod. The hospital was different from the overcrowded, understaffed facility where her mother had been previously treated. Hillcrest Medical Center was quiet, with private rooms, attentive nurses, and state-of-the-art equipment. When Zara entered her mother's room, she found her looking more comfortable than she had in months. Zara, baby, her mother said, reaching out a thin hand. This place is incredible. They're already talking about starting the new treatment next week. Zara squeezed her mother's hand, fighting back tears. That's wonderful, Mama. Her mother's eyes narrowed. What did you do, Zara? How are we affording this? You didn't do anything illegal, did you? No, nothing illegal, Zara assured her, avoiding her mother's gaze. Then what? Tell me the truth. Zara took a deep breath. I got married, Mama. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. Married? To who? When? His name is Alexander Reed. He's very wealthy. We're getting married in 2 weeks, but he's already arranged for your care. The Alexander Reed? The businessman? Her mother looked stunned. How did you even meet him? Why didn't you tell me you were dating someone? Zara couldn't lie to her mother, not completely. It's complicated, Mama. We weren't dating. It's sort of an arranged situation. Understanding dawned in her mother's eyes. Oh, Zara, what have you done? You sold yourself to save me? I made a choice, Zara said firmly. 3 years and then I'm free. And you'll be healthy. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. No mother wants her child to sacrifice herself this way. It's done, Mama. And it's worth it to see you getting better care. Please don't worry about me. I can handle this. They spent the next hour talking about the new treatment, carefully avoiding the subject of Zara's impending marriage. When visiting hours ended, Zara kissed her mother goodbye and promised to return tomorrow. Back at the penthouse, Zara found Alexander at the dining table working on his laptop. He barely glanced up when she entered. Your mother is comfortable? He asked, still typing. Yes. Thank you for arranging the transfer so quickly. He nodded. Dinner will be served shortly. I expect you to join me. Zara bit back a sharp retort. This was her life now, following the commands of a man who saw her as little more than a convenient accessory. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware against fine china. Alexander remained focused on his work, occasionally taking a bite of the exquisitely prepared food without seeming to taste it. Finally, Zara couldn't stand it anymore. Is this how it's going to be for 3 years? Silently coexisting like strangers? Alexander looked up, his expression unreadable. Would you prefer forced conversation? Small talk about the weather perhaps. I'd prefer some acknowledgement that I'm a human being, not just another possession you've acquired. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, that she would speak to him this way. You agreed to the terms, he said coolly. I don't recall stimulating dinner conversation being part of our contract. Zara pushed her plate away, appetite gone. Fine. May I be excused from this delightful interaction? For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded. The wedding planner will be here at 10 tomorrow. Your input is expected, within reason. Within reason, Zara repeated. Meaning as long as I agree with whatever you've already decided? A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so brief she almost missed it. You're learning quickly. Zara stood, fighting to keep her composure. Good night, Mr. Reed. Good night, future Mrs. Reed. The title sent a chill down her spine as she walked away, keenly aware of his eyes following her. 2 weeks until the wedding. 2 weeks until this arrangement became official in the eyes of the law and society. 2 weeks until she truly belonged to a man who saw marriage as nothing more than another business transaction. The next morning brought a parade of professionals to the penthouse, each tasked with transforming Zara into someone worthy of being Alexander Reed's wife. The stylist critically assessed her hair, deciding that while the natural curls should stay, they needed proper shaping. The makeup artist taught her how to apply products that enhanced her features while looking natural. The personal shopper arrived with racks of clothing for her to try on. Everything from casual wear to formal gowns. Mr. Reed was specific about the colors and styles, the woman explained, holding up a deep burgundy dress that would complement Zara's dark skin tone perfectly. He has excellent taste. Of course he did. Alexander Reed managed every aspect of his life with precision, and now that included her appearance. The etiquette coach, a stern woman named Ms. Winters, was the most challenging. She critiqued everything from Zara's posture to the way she held her fork. As Mrs. Reed, you'll be under constant scrutiny, Ms. Winters explained. Every gesture, every word will reflect on your husband. Society columnists will be watching for any mistake. I'm not ashamed of where I come from, Zara said defiantly. Ms. Winters raised an eyebrow. No one is asking you to be. But there's a difference between honoring your roots and allowing others to use your background against you, and by extension against Mr. Reed. By late afternoon, Zara's head was spinning with rules and instructions. When Alexander arrived home, he paused in the doorway of the living room, his eyes taking in her transformation. Her hair was styled in a way that made her natural curls look elegant rather than wild, her makeup subtle but effective, and she wore one of the new outfits. A simple but clearly expensive dark blue dress that fit her perfectly. Better, he said after a moment. Ms. Winters, I trust today was productive? Very, the woman replied. Ms. Jones is a quick learner. Good. That will be all for today. When everyone had left, Alexander handed Zara a small box. Put this on. Inside was a stunning engagement ring, a large oval diamond surrounded by smaller stones set in platinum. It probably cost more than her mother's entire medical treatment. The wedding rings are being made, Alexander said as she slipped it on her finger. This should suffice for now. We have a charity event tomorrow night. Your first public appearance as my fiancé. Zara stared at the ring, feeling its weight in more ways than one. That's why all this was necessary? To make sure I don't embarrass you? Yes, he said simply, not bothering to sugarcoat it. The press will be there. First impressions matter. And what's our story? Zara asked. How did the great Alexander Reed meet and fall in love with someone like me? We met through your work at the community center. I was impressed by your dedication to helping underprivileged children. We kept our relationship private until now. The story wasn't entirely fiction. Zara did volunteer at the local community center when she could spare the time between her jobs. Alexander must have done his research thoroughly before selecting her for this arrangement. And if someone asks how you proposed? Private dinner at my vacation home in the Maldives. Simple, romantic, believable. Everything calculated, everything planned. Nothing genuine. What if I can't do this? Zara asked suddenly. What if I can't pretend to love you convincingly? Alexander studied her face. You will. Because you understand what's at stake. Your mother's treatment costs $23,000 per month. The experimental procedure is another $500,000. You need me far more than I need you, Zara. Remember that. The cold reminder of her desperation stung, but it also strengthened her resolve. She would play this role perfectly for her mother's sake. I understand, she said quietly. Alexander nodded, then checked his watch. I have a business dinner. Don't wait up. After he left, Zara wandered through the penthouse, feeling like an intruder in someone else's life. She found herself in Alexander's home office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Curious, she looked at the framed photos on his desk, surprisingly few for a man of his status. One showed a younger Alexander with an older couple, presumably his parents. Another featured him shaking hands with various dignitaries. But what caught her attention was a small frame, partially hidden behind the others, showing a young Alexander with his arm around a pretty woman, both of them smiling genuinely. Who was she? A former girlfriend? An ex-wife she didn't know about? Mrs. Chin mentioned you were exploring. Zara jumped, nearly dropping the photo. Alexander stood in the doorway, his expression neutral. I thought you had a dinner, she said, hastily replacing the frame. Cancelled. His eyes went to the photo she'd been examining. Curiosity is natural, but in the future, please respect my privacy. Who is she? Zara asked, ignoring the reprimand. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then surprisingly he said, my sister, Elena. She died 10 years ago. The unexpected revelation and the flash of genuine pain in his eyes caught Zara off guard. I'm sorry. I didn't know you had a sister. Few people do. I prefer to keep my personal life private. He moved to his desk, effectively dismissing the topic. The wedding planner left some samples for you to review. They're in the living room. Zara recognized the shift back to business. I'll look at them now. As she turned to leave, Alexander spoke again. Zara. She paused, looking back at him. You'll do fine tomorrow night. Just follow Ms. Winter's guidance and be yourself, within reason, of course. Was that his version of reassurance? It was hard to tell with him. Good night, Alexander, she said, using his first name deliberately. A slight pause. Good night, Zara. As she walked away, Zara realized this was the closest thing to a normal conversation they'd had since this arrangement began. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny crack in the perfect, polished facade of Alexander Reed, revealing that somewhere inside the cold businessman might be a human being after all. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the glittering jewelry of the city's elite. Zara stood beside Alexander, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, smiling until her cheeks hurt. The deep red gown she wore had been custom-made in just 2 days, the fabric hugging her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor. Diamond earrings, another gift from Alexander, caught the light with every movement of her head. Smile like you mean it, Alexander murmured, his lips barely moving. The society columnist from the Tribune is watching. Zara tightened her grip on his arm slightly. I'm trying, she whispered through her smile. It's not easy pretending to be madly in love with someone who just reminded me to smile properly. To her surprise, a low chuckle escaped him. You have spirit, I'll give you that. Before she could respond, they were approached by an older couple. The man heavy-set with silver hair, the woman rail-thin with an obvious facelift. Alexander. We were beginning to think the rumors of your engagement were just that. Rumors? The woman said, her eyes assessing Zara critically. Margaret, Charles, Alexander greeted them smoothly. Allow me to introduce my fiancée, Zara Jones. Zara, this is Charles Whitmore, chairman of the hospital board, and his wife Margaret. Zara extended her hand, remembering Ms. Winter's instructions on proper greetings. It's lovely to meet you both. Margaret took her hand briefly. Jones? I don't believe I know your family. The implication was clear. Margaret was trying to place Zara's social standing. You wouldn't, Zara replied honestly. My father was a high school teacher and my mother worked, in nursing before her illness. Alexander's arm slipped around her waist, a possessive gesture that surprised her. Zara's work at the community center is what brought us together. Her dedication to helping underprivileged children is remarkable. Charles nodded approvingly, but Margaret's smile remained tight. How charitable of you, Alexander. And when is the happy day? 2 weeks from Saturday. A small, private ceremony. So soon? My, is there a reason for the rush? Margaret's eyebrows raised suggestively. Zara felt heat rising to her cheeks, but Alexander answered smoothly, when you find the right person, Margaret, why wait? After the Whitmores moved on, Alexander guided Zara through the crowd, introducing her to countless people whose names she struggled to remember. Most were polite if curious about their relationship. A few, like Margaret, made thinly veiled inquiries about her background or speculated about the sudden engagement. By the time they reached the bar, Zara was exhausted from maintaining her facade. Water, please, she requested from the bartender. Make that 2, Alexander added, surprising her again. You don't drink? She asked as they moved away with their waters. Not at events like this. I prefer to keep a clear head when dealing with people who are constantly looking for weaknesses to exploit. It was perhaps the most personal thing he'd shared with her. That's actually smart. You sound surprised that I might occasionally have good ideas. Was that a touch of humor in his voice? Before she could respond, a tall blonde woman approached, her smile predatory. Alexander, darling. I was devastated to hear about your engagement. You never mentioned you were seeing anyone. Alexander's posture stiffened slightly. Victoria. I wasn't aware you were on the guest list tonight. Oh, the Millers are such dears. They always include me. Victoria turned her attention to Zara, eyeing her up and down. And this must be the lucky bride-to-be. How unexpected. The emphasis on the last word made its meaning clear. Zara Jones. Zara introduced herself, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. Victoria ignored the offered hand. Jones. And what exactly do you do, Zara Jones, when you're not capturing billionaires? Alexander stepped closer to Zara. Victoria, I believe your date is looking for you. Oh, he can wait, Victoria waved dismissively. I'm far more interested in hearing how you two lovebirds met. It must be quite the story considering Alexander's usual, preferences. Zara felt anger rising within her. This woman was deliberately trying to humiliate her. We met at the community center where I volunteer, Zara said, her voice steady. Alexander was there for a charity event. He asked me out for coffee and things progressed naturally from there. Victoria's smile was venomous. How quaint. And now, just months later, you're engaged. One might almost think there was a reason for such haste. The only reason, Alexander said coldly, is that when I know what I want, I don't waste time. Now, if you'll excuse us, Victoria, we have other guests to greet. He led Zara away, his hand pressing firmly against the small of her back. Who was that? Zara asked when they were out of earshot. Someone from my past who clearly hasn't accepted it's over, Alexander replied tersely. You handled her well. Thanks, I think. Zara glanced back to see Victoria watching them, her expression calculating. She seems like the type to cause problems. She is. But she's also the daughter of one of my major investors, which complicates matters. The rest of the evening continued in much the same way, polite conversation, curious looks, and the occasional thinly veiled barb. Zara found herself increasingly grateful for Ms. Winter's coaching as she navigated the social minefield. It was nearly midnight when Alexander finally suggested they leave. In the car, Zara slipped off her heels with a sigh of relief. You did well tonight, Alexander said, surprising her with the direct compliment. Better than I expected. Thank you, I think. Zara wiggled her toes, trying to restore circulation. Is it always like that? Everyone watching, judging, looking for weaknesses. Alexander nodded. Welcome to my world. It's why I needed someone like you, someone smart enough to navigate these waters without drowning. Someone desperate enough, you mean? He looked at her directly. Yes, that too. Desperation is a powerful motivator for loyalty. That's not loyalty, Zara countered. It's survival. In my experience, there's little difference. The car pulled up to the building and Alexander helped her out, his hand surprisingly warm against hers. In the elevator, standing closer than necessary, Zara became acutely aware of him. His height, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his shoulder brushed against hers when the elevator moved. Inside the penthouse, he loosened his tie as Zara set her clutch on the side table. I should check on my mother, she said, reaching for her phone. I already did, Alexander replied. I had my assistant call the hospital while we were at the event. Your mother is doing well. The doctors are pleased with her progress. Zara blinked in surprise. You did that? Why? Alexander shrugged. It seemed practical. You were concerned, and concern leads to distraction. Thank you, she said quietly. That was considerate. He nodded, already moving toward his office. Good night, Zara. Good night. As she prepared for bed, Zara found herself puzzling over the contradictions of Alexander Reed. Cold and calculating one moment, surprisingly thoughtful the next. What was real and what was part of the facade he presented to the world? More importantly, could she maintain her own facade for 3 years without losing herself in the process? The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Despite Alexander's assurance that it would be a small, private ceremony, nothing associated with a Reed event could ever truly be small. The guest list included 200 essential business associates, political connections, and social elites. The flowers alone cost more than Zara's yearly rent. Between final fittings for her wedding dress, a stunning creation that made her feel like a princess despite the circumstances, and meetings with the wedding planner, Zara spent as much time as possible at the hospital with her mother. You look tired, baby, her mother observed during one visit. Are you sleeping enough? Zara forced a smile. Just busy with wedding preparations. Nothing to worry about. Her mother reached for her hand. And this man, Alexander, is he treating you well? It was a complicated question. Alexander wasn't cruel or abusive. He provided everything she needed and more. But was that treating her well, when the entire relationship was based on a contractual obligation? He's fair, Zara answered carefully. We're still getting to know each other. That's not very reassuring, her mother frowned. Marriage should be built on love and respect, not fairness. Times change, Mama. Not everyone marries for love anymore. But you should, her mother insisted. You deserve love, Zara. Real love, not just a convenient arrangement. If only it were that simple. Let's talk about something else. How's the new treatment going? The diversion worked, and her mother launched into details about the promising results from her first round of therapy. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, which was more hope than they'd had in months. Later that afternoon, Zara returned to the penthouse to find Alexander in a heated phone conversation. That's unacceptable, James. The merger was contingent on maintaining the current management structure. If Donnelly insists on replacing the executive team, we walk. He paused, listening. No, I don't care what pressure he's under. These are people who've worked for the company for 20 years. I'm not throwing them to the wolves for a better quarterly report. He noticed Zara and nodded briefly before continuing his call. Set up a meeting for tomorrow. And make it clear that this is a deal breaker for me. After ending the call, Alexander rubbed his temples, a rare display of stress. Problems with a merger? Nothing that can't be solved with a clear demonstration of priorities, Alexander replied. How's your mother? The question caught Zara off guard. It seemed genuinely interested rather than merely polite. Better, she answered. The new treatment is showing positive results. Alexander nodded. Good. I've arranged for Dr. Chen to join her medical team. He's the leading specialist in her condition. Zara blinked in surprise. Thank you. That's very generous. Alexander waved off her thanks. It's practical. Your mother's health directly impacts your state of mind, which affects your ability to fulfill your role in our arrangement. Of course. Everything came back to the arrangement. It was foolish to think he might have done it out of genuine concern. The wedding rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night, Alexander reminded her. My parents will be there. They're flying in from Switzerland. Zara felt a flutter of nervousness. Do they know about our arrangement? No, and they won't, Alexander said firmly. As far as they're concerned, this is a normal relationship that moved quickly because we're certain about our feelings. And they'll believe that? That you, of all people, fell madly in love after a few months. A hint of a smile touched his lips. You'd be surprised what people are willing to believe when it fits their hopes. My mother has been pushing me to settle down for years. And what about my side? We need people who will believe I'm marrying for love, not money. Already arranged. Your friends from the community center have been invited to both the rehearsal dinner and the wedding. I've also included your former colleagues from the university library. Again, his thoroughness surprised her. You really do think of everything, don't you? It's what I do, he said simply. Planning for contingencies is second nature in business. This is no different. But it was different, Zara thought as she walked to her room. A business deal didn't require her to lie to her friends, to her mother, to present a false face to the world and pretend that she was in love with a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient solution to a public relations problem. That evening they shared a quiet dinner at home. Alexander was preoccupied with work as usual, but occasionally he would ask Zara a question about her day or her mother's treatment. It wasn't exactly warm conversation, but it was more than the stony silence of their early meals together. As they finished dessert, a delicate chocolate mousse that Zara suspected had been added to the menu because she'd mentioned liking chocolate, Alexander received a call that took him to his office. Zara was about to retreat to her room when she heard a crash followed by a string of curse words from Alexander's office. Concerned, she knocked on the door. Everything okay in there? No answer. She knocked again, then cautiously opened the door to find Alexander standing amidst broken glass, blood dripping from his hand. What happened? She asked, rushing forward. Nothing. A momentary loss of control, Alexander replied tersely, clutching his bleeding hand with the other. I'll handle it. But Zara was already examining the cut. This needs cleaning. Come with me. To her surprise, he followed her to the kitchen where she ran his hand under cold water, revealing a nasty gash across his palm. What did you do, punch your glass paperweight? She asked, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Alexander's silence was answer enough. Bad news on the call? Zara guessed, rummaging in a drawer for the first aid kit Mrs. Chen had shown her. After a moment, Alexander said, the merger fell through. Donnelly went with another offer that didn't include protections for the current employees. I'm sorry, Zara said, genuinely meaning it. It sounds like you were trying to do the right thing. Alexander watched as she cleaned the cut with antiseptic. The right thing is rarely the profitable thing. My board will be displeased. Because you tried to protect people's jobs? Because I let personal concerns interfere with a business decision. He winced slightly as she applied more antiseptic. The merger would have increased our market value by 12%. Zara carefully bandaged his hand. And how many people would have lost their livelihoods? 42 families, Alexander answered without hesitation. Most of them have been with the company since the beginning. Zara finished wrapping his hand. Then you made the right call even if it cost you the deal. Alexander flexed his fingers carefully, testing the bandage. You have a surprisingly gentle touch for someone who so clearly dislikes me. Zara put away the first aid kit. I don't dislike you, Alexander. I dislike our situation. There's a difference. Is there? He studied her face. Most people in your position would hate me on principle. I'm not most people, Zara replied. And hating you would require more energy than I'm willing to spend on someone I'm stuck with for 3 years. To her shock, Alexander actually laughed. A real laugh, not the polite chuckle he used in social situations. Practical of you. I learned from the best, she said dryly. Their eyes met, and for a moment the tension between them shifted from antagonistic to something else. Something Zara wasn't ready to examine too closely. Thank you, Alexander said finally, raising his bandaged hand. This was unexpected. You're welcome. Try not to punch any more glass objects. He nodded, his expression returning to its usual neutral state. Good night, Zara. Good night, Alexander. As she walked back to her room, Zara wondered about the man behind the carefully controlled facade. The man who fought to protect his employees' jobs at the cost of a lucrative deal. The man who arranged for a specialist doctor for her mother without being asked. The man who, for just a moment, had shown a flash of real emotion when things didn't go as planned. Perhaps there was more to Alexander Reed than she had initially believed. The question was whether that made their arrangement easier or infinitely more complicated. The rehearsal dinner was held at an exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Soft lighting, exquisite food, and the gentle notes of a string quartet created an atmosphere of romantic elegance that almost made Zara forget the reality of her situation. Almost. Alexander's parents were not what she had expected. His father, Richard Reed, was warm and boisterous where Alexander was reserved and controlled. His mother, Elise, had the same piercing intelligence as her son but tempered it with genuine warmth and humor. We've waited so long for Alexander to find someone, Elise confided to Zara as they sipped champagne. I was beginning to think he'd choose work over love forever. Guilt twisted in Zara's stomach. These kind people were being deceived, believing their son had finally found happiness when in reality, he'd simply found a convenient business solution. Alexander is very focused on his work, Zara replied carefully. Elise nodded. That's putting it mildly. Ever since Elena's death, he's thrown himself into work. It became his refuge from grief. She squeezed Zara's hand. But now he has you. I haven't seen him smile this much in years. Zara glanced across the room where Alexander was speaking with her friends from the community center. He was smiling, looking relaxed and charming in a way she'd rarely seen. It was all an act, of course, but a convincing one. Elena was very special to him, Zara said softly, remembering the photo on Alexander's desk. Elise's eyes widened slightly. He told you about Elena? My goodness, he must truly love you. Alexander never speaks of her, not even to us. Before Zara could respond, Richard joined them, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders. What secrets are you two sharing? Just getting to know my future daughter-in-law, Elise replied with a warm smile. Alexander chose well. He certainly did, Richard agreed, raising his glass to Zara. To new beginnings and family. Zara raised her glass, the guilt intensifying. These people didn't deserve to be lied to. Yet here she was, playing her part in the deception. Later, as guests mingled over dessert, Alexander found her on the balcony where she'd stepped out for a moment of quiet. Everything all right? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Your parents are lovely people, Zara said, looking out at the city lights. I hate lying to them. Alexander was quiet for a moment. They like you. That's not a lie. But the reason I'm marrying you is. Does it matter? They're happy. You're getting what you need. I'm getting what I need. Zara turned to face him. And what exactly are you getting, Alexander? You've never really explained why this arrangement was necessary. Why not just date someone normally? Alexander's jaw tightened. Dating requires time and emotional investment I'm not willing to make. This is more efficient. Efficient, Zara repeated, shaking her head. Is that how you see everything? In terms of efficiency? It's served me well so far. Has it? You seem. She hesitated, then decided to speak her mind. You seem lonely. Something flickered in his eyes, anger perhaps, or surprise that she would dare to analyze him. You don't know me well enough to make that assessment. Don't I? We've lived together for almost 2 weeks. I've seen how you work until midnight, how you barely interact with anyone unless it serves a purpose. That doesn't strike me as a fulfilling life. I didn't ask for your opinion on my life choices, Alexander said coldly. No, you just asked me to share that life for the next 3 years, Zara countered. That gives me some right to observe that it seems empty. For a moment she thought she'd pushed too far. Alexander's expression darkened, and he took a step toward her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You think you understand me after 2 weeks? His voice was low and tense. You have no idea what drives me, what I want, what I need. Zara held her ground, though her heart was racing. Then tell me. We're supposed to be in love, about to get married. Shouldn't I know those things? Their eyes locked in silent challenge. The air between them seemed to vibrate with tension. Alexander. Zara. Time for toasts. Richard's voice broke the moment. Alexander stepped back, his expression once again controlled. We should go in. Of course, Zara agreed, relieved and disappointed at the same time. Wouldn't want to disrupt the schedule. As they returned to the party, Alexander's hand settled at the small of her back, a gesture that had become familiar over the past week of public appearances. But tonight it felt different somehow. More deliberate. More possessive. The toasts were emotional, especially the one from her best friend Jasmine, who spoke of finding true love and knowing when someone was right for you. Zara fought back tears, knowing it was all based on a lie. When it was Alexander's turn to speak, he surprised her. I've never been one for public displays, he began, his gaze finding Zara. My colleagues would tell you I'm more comfortable with spreadsheets than speeches. But Zara deserves words, not just actions. He paused, and when he continued, his voice had softened. They say the right person comes along when you least expect it. I wasn't looking for love when I met Zara. I was focused on work, on the next deal, the next challenge. But sometimes life has other plans. His words were perfect, romantic enough to be convincing, vague enough to avoid specific lies. Zara marveled at his ability to say exactly the right thing while revealing absolutely nothing of himself. To my beautiful bride-to-be, Alexander concluded, raising his glass. Thank you for showing me that some things are more valuable than efficiency. Everyone laughed and applauded. Zara smiled, playing her part even as his words, a pointed reference to their earlier conversation, stung. The evening wound down and guests began to depart. Alexander's parents were staying at the penthouse, in the guest suite on the lower level, so they all returned home together. Would you mind if we borrowed Alexander for a nightcap, Zara? Richard asked as they entered the lobby. Just a bit of father-son time before the big day. Of course not, Zara replied. I should get some rest anyway. Elise hugged her warmly. It's been wonderful getting to know you, dear. I can see why Alexander fell for you. After saying goodnight, Zara retreated to her room, kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. She changed into comfortable pajamas and was about to get into bed when a knock sounded at her door. Alexander stood there, still in his suit pants and shirt, though he'd removed his tie and jacket. May I come in? Surprised, Zara stepped back to allow him entry. Is everything okay? I thought you were having drinks with your father. We did. It was brief. Alexander paced a few steps, then turned to face her. I want to clarify something about our earlier conversation. Zara crossed her arms, suddenly conscious of being in her pajamas. Okay. You suggested my life is empty. That I'm lonely. His voice was controlled, but Zara could sense the tension beneath the surface. You're not entirely wrong. The admission surprised her. I didn't expect you to agree with me. I rarely waste energy arguing against obvious truths. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the night sky. After Elena died, I found that work was the only thing that made sense. Numbers don't lie. Contracts don't break your heart. Business is predictable in ways that people never are. Zara sat on the edge of her bed, watching him. I'm sorry about your sister. What happened to her? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly he said, car accident. She was 24. I was driving. The simple statement held worlds of pain. It wasn't your fault, Zara said gently. The other driver was drunk, ran a red light, Alexander continued as if she hadn't spoken. Logically, I know it wasn't my fault. Emotionally, he shrugged. Well, that's why I prefer logic to emotion. That's why you keep everyone at a distance, Zara realized. Why you created this arrangement instead of risking a real relationship. Alexander turned to face her. This arrangement serves both our needs. It's practical. But is it enough? Zara asked. Is practicality really all you want from life? Something shifted in his eyes, vulnerability quickly masked. It's all I'm willing to risk. The raw honesty of his response caught her off guard. For the first time she was seeing the real Alexander Reed, not the cold businessman but the wounded man beneath. "Thank you for telling me about Elena," she said softly. "It helps me understand you better." Alexander nodded, his composure returning. It seemed relevant given our situation. Back to practicality, Zara noted. His moment of openness had passed. "Well, good night then," she said, standing. Alexander moved toward the door, then paused. "Zara." "Yes." "For what it's worth, I don't regret choosing you." His eyes held hers. "Of all the candidates I considered, you were the most genuine." It was an odd compliment, but Zara found herself appreciating it nonetheless. "Thank you, I think. Good night." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Zara lay in bed, thinking about the glimpse she'd gotten of Alexander's true self. The man had depths she hadn't suspected, pain he kept carefully hidden behind his controlled exterior. It made him more human, more real. And that realization was dangerous. Because feeling sympathy for Alexander Reed, understanding his pain, seeing him as a complex person rather than just a cold businessman, that was a complication she hadn't prepared for. One that could make pretending to love him for the next 3 years far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Zara stood in the bridal suite of the Reed family's country estate, surrounded by the hairstylist, makeup artist, and her 2 closest friends who were serving as bridesmaids. "You look absolutely stunning," Jasmine said, tears in her eyes as she helped adjust the veil. "Alexander is going to lose his mind when he sees you." If only that were true, Zara thought, examining her reflection. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of delicate lace and tiny pearls, fitted perfectly to her body before flowing out in a graceful train. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo with a few curls framing her face. She looked every inch the beautiful bride, except for the doubt clouding her eyes. "Cold feet?" her other friend Tanya asked, noticing her expression. "Just nervous," Zara replied with a forced smile. "It's all happening so fast." "When it's right, you know it," Jasmine said with conviction. "And the way that man looks at you. Trust me, it's right." Zara wondered what Jasmine had seen in Alexander's gaze. Had he really been that convincing? Or was Jasmine simply seeing what she wanted to see, her friend blissfully in love? A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Reed. "May I have a moment with the bride?" Elise asked, smiling warmly. The others filed out, leaving Zara alone with Alexander's mother. "You are a vision," Elise said, taking Zara's hands in hers. "Truly beautiful." "Thank you," Zara replied, genuinely touched. Elise reached into her clutch and pulled out a small velvet box. "I wanted to give you this privately." It was Elena's. Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with a small sapphire charm. "It's beautiful," Zara whispered. "Alexander doesn't know I've kept it all these years," Elise explained as she fastened it around Zara's wrist. "After Elena died, he wanted all reminders of her packed away. It was his way of coping. But I think he's ready now, thanks to you. You've brought something back to life in my son that I feared was gone forever." Guilt twisted in Zara's stomach. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just love him, Zara. Love him enough to heal those wounds he pretends don't exist." If only it were that simple, Zara thought. If only this were a real marriage built on love instead of a business arrangement with an expiration date. "I'll try," she promised, meaning it more than Elise could know. Another knock announced it was time. Richard entered to escort Zara down the aisle, as her own father had passed away years ago. "Ready to become a Reed?" he asked kindly. No, Zara thought. "I'll never be ready for this lie." But she smiled and said, "Ready?" The ceremony was held in the estate's garden, with rows of white chairs set up facing an arbor covered in white roses and greenery. Guests rose as the string quartet began playing, and Zara took her first steps toward her future husband. Alexander stood tall and handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His expression, as always, was controlled, but when his eyes met hers, something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or appreciation. For a moment, it was easy to believe this was real, that she was walking toward a man who truly wanted her as his wife. The ceremony itself was brief but beautiful. They had opted for traditional vows. Neither of them wanted to fabricate personal promises they didn't intend to keep. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander leaned down to kiss her. Their lips met in what was meant to be a chaste, ceremonial kiss, but something unexpected happened. Alexander's hand came up to cup her cheek, and the kiss deepened slightly, becoming something more than just for show. It lasted only seconds, but when they parted, Zara felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom. Alexander kept Zara close throughout, his hand at her waist, his eyes frequently seeking hers. To anyone watching, they appeared every inch the besotted newlyweds. During their first dance, Alexander held her closer than necessary, his breath warm against her ear. "You look beautiful," he murmured so only she could hear. "Thank you," Zara replied, surprised by the genuine compliment. "You clean up pretty well yourself." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We make a convincing couple." "Your mother gave me Elena's bracelet," Zara said, feeling his slight tensing at the mention of his sister. "I hope that's okay." Alexander's eyes dropped to the delicate silver chain on her wrist. "I didn't know she'd kept it. She thought you were ready to have reminders of Elena in your life again. Because of me." The pain that flashed across his face was quickly masked. "My mother is optimistic by nature." "Is she wrong? Are you still not ready?" Alexander's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Let's not discuss this now. We have an audience." "Right. The performance. That's all this was, a show for others, not a real conversation between husband and wife." The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of champagne toasts, cake cutting, and conversations with guests who all seemed genuinely happy for them. By the time they said goodbye to the last guests, Zara was exhausted from maintaining her facade. According to plan, they would spend the night at the estate before flying to Maldives the next morning for a week-long honeymoon that would really be more of a working vacation for Alexander and a chance for Zara to relax. Alexander's parents had already retired to their suite when Alexander and Zara made their way upstairs to the master bedroom. An awkward silence fell as they entered the room, both acutely aware that this was the first night of their marriage. "I can sleep on the couch," Alexander offered, gesturing to a chaise lounge in the corner. "Don't be ridiculous," Zara replied, kicking off her shoes. "The bed is huge. We can share it without coming anywhere near each other." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Practical of you." "I learned from the best," she echoed their earlier conversation, earning a slight smile from him. They took turns in the bathroom, Alexander changing into silk pajama pants and a t-shirt, Zara into a modest nightgown. When they finally lay down on opposite sides of the king-sized bed, the silence between them was almost palpable. "Alexander?" Zara said softly into the darkness. "Yes." "Why me? Really? There must have been plenty of women who would have agreed to your terms. Women from your world who would have been easier to integrate into your life." The sheets rustled as Alexander turned toward her, though in the darkness she could barely make out his silhouette. Those women would have had agendas of their own. Hidden motives, ambitions, family pressures. "You were simpler." "Simpler," Zara repeated, not sure if she should be offended. "That came out wrong," Alexander said, surprising her with the admission. "What I meant was your motivation was transparent. Your mother's health. Nothing convoluted or manipulative about it. And that was important to you? Transparency?" Alexander was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. Then quietly he said, "I've learned the hard way that people rarely show their true selves until it's too late. With you, what I saw was what I got. A woman willing to sacrifice for someone she loves. That's rare." The unexpected insight into his thinking left Zara momentarily speechless. "I don't know whether to be flattered or insulted," she finally said. A low chuckle came from Alexander's side of the bed. "Take it as a compliment. Of all the candidates I considered, you were the one I thought I could tolerate living with for 3 years." "Such romance," Zara teased, surprising herself with the light tone. "No wonder I couldn't resist." "Get some sleep, Mrs. Reed," Alexander replied, and Zara could hear the smile in his voice. "Tomorrow we begin our honeymoon charade." "Good night, Mr. Reed." As she drifted toward sleep, Zara realized that something had shifted between them. The antagonism of their early days together had evolved into something more complex. Not quite friendship, but a mutual understanding that made their arrangement seem less like a cold business deal and more like a partnership. It was a dangerous shift, because while pretending to love Alexander Reed for the public was one thing, actually developing real feelings for him would be a complication neither of them had bargained for. The Maldives were everything the brochures promised: crystal clear waters, white sand beaches, and luxurious privacy. Their overwater bungalow sat at the end of a long pier, offering uninterrupted views of the horizon and complete seclusion from other guests. Zara stood on the deck, watching fish dart through the transparent waters below, still trying to process the reality that this was her life now. Mrs. Alexander Reed, honeymooning in paradise with a husband who had bought her presents with medical care for her mother. "The view suits you," Alexander commented, joining her at the railing. He'd changed from his travel clothes into linen pants and a light shirt, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. It's breathtaking, Zara agreed. Hard to believe places like this really exist. I thought you might appreciate it. Your mother mentioned you'd always wanted to see the ocean. Zara turned to him in surprise. You talked to my mother about me? Alexander shrugged. I spoke with her several times while you were busy with wedding preparations. She wanted to make sure I wasn't some sort of villain forcing you into marriage. And what did you tell her? The truth, that I care for her daughter and would ensure she was well taken care of. He leaned against the railing. It wasn't entirely a lie. I do care about your well-being, Zara. Happy wife, happy life, as they say. Zara rolled her eyes at the cliché. Ever practical. Always. Alexander checked his watch. I have a video conference in 30 minutes. After that, we can have dinner on the beach if you'd like. And there it was, the reminder that even in paradise, business came first for Alexander Reed. Sounds lovely, Zara replied, keeping her disappointment from her voice. I think I'll go for a swim. The next few days fell into a pattern. Alexander would work in the mornings while Zara explored the island, swam in the crystal waters, or read in a hammock. They would share lunch, sometimes making pleasant conversation about the island, the food, or Zara's mother's improving condition. Then Alexander would return to work until dinner, when they would dine together before retreating to their separate sides of the massive bed. It was a peaceful coexistence, but hardly the passionate honeymoon other guests assumed they were enjoying. Zara caught more than one sympathetic glance from staff who clearly thought the handsome groom was neglecting his beautiful bride by working through their honeymoon. On their fourth day, Zara was snorkeling near their bungalow when she spotted Alexander on the deck, pacing as he spoke on his phone. His expression was tense, his free hand clenched at his side. When she climbed back onto the deck, he was still arguing with whoever was on the other end of the call. I don't care what the board thinks. The decision is final. We're not laying off the Detroit team. He paused, listening. Then find another way to cut costs. That's what I pay you for, isn't it? He ended the call with more force than necessary, then noticed Zara standing there in her dripping swimsuit. Problems at the office? She asked, reaching for a towel. Alexander's jaw tightened. Nothing I can't handle. Doesn't sound like nothing. Something about laying off a team? The board wants to cut costs by closing our Detroit factory. 300 people would lose their jobs. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. It would boost our quarterly numbers, but destroy families who have been loyal to the company for generations. Zara wrapped the towel around herself. And you're fighting to keep it open, even though it would be more profitable to close it. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not a monster, Zara. I never said you were, she replied carefully. But you've always emphasized that business comes first. That efficiency is your priority. Efficiency doesn't always mean cutting jobs, Alexander argued. Those workers have specialized skills that would take years to replicate elsewhere. The short-term gain would lead to long-term loss. It sounded logical, pragmatic, exactly the sort of reasoning she'd expect from Alexander. And yet, she sensed there was more to it than pure business calculations. Is that the only reason you're fighting for them? Alexander turned to look out at the ocean, his profile sharp against the blue sky. My father started in that factory. Worked his way up from the floor to management before eventually taking over the company when my grandfather retired. Those people aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet to me. They're part of the Reed legacy. The admission surprised her. It was the most personal thing he'd shared with her since their wedding night. I didn't know that about your father, Zara said softly. It's not something I advertise. In business, sentiment is often seen as weakness. But not by you. Alexander turned to face her. I separate sentiment from business decisions. But that doesn't mean I ignore the human cost of those decisions. Zara studied him, seeing beyond the controlled facade to the complexity beneath. You're a contradiction, Alexander Reed. You pretend to be cold and calculating, but then you fight for your employees. You claim to avoid emotional entanglements, yet you arrange this entire marriage to please your parents and business associates. Is that what you think? That I did this for appearances? Didn't you? You said yourself you needed a wife to project stability, to satisfy the board's concerns about your commitment to the company's future. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that Zara could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. That was part of it. But not all. What's the rest then? Zara asked, suddenly very aware of her state of undress, of the small space between them. For a moment she thought he might actually tell her. Then his phone rang again, breaking the tension. "I need to take this," he said, stepping back. "We'll continue the conversation later." But they didn't. That evening at dinner, Alexander was distracted, checking his phone frequently. When they returned to the bungalow, he immediately went to his laptop, immersing himself in work until Zara finally went to bed alone. She was almost asleep when she felt the mattress dip as he joined her. In the darkness, his voice was soft. "I'm sorry about dinner. The situation with the factory is complicated." "It's fine," Zara replied, touched by the rare apology. "Your work is important." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "This wasn't how I planned our honeymoon." Zara couldn't help but laugh softly. "I don't think either of us planned any of this, Alexander." "True enough." She could hear the smile in his voice. "But I didn't intend to neglect you quite so thoroughly." "I'm not complaining. The resort is beautiful and I've enjoyed the peace." "Still," Alexander said, "we should do something together tomorrow. Something honeymoon-like." "Like what?" "There's a private island about an hour from here by boat. We could pack a lunch, spend the day there." The suggestion caught Zara off guard. It sounded almost like a real date. "What about your work?" "It can wait one day." Zara turned toward him in the darkness, though she could barely make out his silhouette. "Who are you and what have you done with Alexander Reed?" His low chuckle warmed something inside her. "Get some sleep, Zara. Tomorrow we play the part of newlyweds properly." The next morning dawned clear and perfect. True to his word, Alexander had arranged for a boat to take them to a tiny uninhabited island with nothing but sand, palm trees, and a small cabana set up for their comfort. "This is incredible," Zara breathed as they stepped onto the pristine beach. Alexander looked pleased with her reaction. Privacy has its advantages. No one watching, no performance required. It was the first time since their arrangement began that they were truly alone, with no audience to perform for, no appearances to maintain. Just two people on a beach getting to know each other. They swam in the crystal waters, Alexander surprising Zara with his strong, confident strokes. They shared a picnic lunch under the shade of palm trees, talking about books they'd read, places they wanted to visit. Normal conversation. Almost like a real couple. "You surprise me," Zara admitted as they walked along the shoreline, waves lapping at their bare feet. "How so?" "You're different here. More relaxed. Almost human." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "As opposed to?" "The robot CEO who calculates every word, every gesture for maximum efficiency." He smiled slightly. Perhaps the calculation was that relaxing would be more efficient today. "And there he is," Zara laughed. "The Alexander Reed I know, turning even enjoyment into a strategic decision." "Old habits," Alexander admitted. "But I am enjoying today, Zara. More than I expected to." The simple honesty in his voice touched her. "Me too." They stopped walking, facing each other in the gentle surf. For a moment, Zara thought he might kiss her, not for show, not for an audience, but because he wanted to. She wasn't sure how she felt about that possibility. The moment passed when Alexander's phone, which he'd brought despite promising to disconnect, rang shrilly. "You should get that," Zara said, stepping back. "It might be important." Alexander checked the screen, his expression darkening. "It's the board chairman." "The factory?" He nodded. "I need to take this." "I'm sorry." "It's okay." "Really?" As he walked away to take the call, Zara watched him, seeing the tension return to his shoulders, the businessman replacing the man who had been emerging throughout the day. Part of her was disappointed, but another part was relieved. Because the more she saw of the real Alexander Reed, the man who fought for his employees, who honored his family legacy, who could laugh and relax and enjoy a simple day on the beach, the harder it became to remember that their marriage was just a business arrangement. Temporary. Conditional. Not real. When Alexander returned, his expression was grim. "We need to go back. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow that I can't miss." "Of course," Zara agreed, hiding her disappointment. The honeymoon was almost over anyway. "I'm sorry," Alexander said again, and he seemed to genuinely mean it. "I wanted—" He stopped, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. We should get back and pack." As they boarded the boat for the return journey, Zara wondered what he had been about to say. What had he wanted from their day together? From their arrangement? More importantly, what did she want? Because somewhere between disgust and resignation, her feelings toward Alexander Reed had begun to shift into something far more complicated, and potentially dangerous for her heart. Returning to real life after their abbreviated honeymoon brought new challenges. Alexander was immediately absorbed in the crisis at work, staying late at the office and bringing work home when he did return to the penthouse. Zara found herself settling into the role of Mrs. Reed, visiting her mother daily, whose condition continued to improve, managing the household with Mrs. Chen's help, and occasionally attending charity events or business dinners at Alexander's side. To the outside world, they presented the image of a perfect couple. Alexander was attentive in public, his hand often at the small of her back, his eyes frequently seeking hers. Zara played her part with increasing ease, her smiles seeming less forced, her affection for her husband appearing more genuine. Sometimes she almost forgot it was an act. Almost. The reality was that they lived largely separate lives under the same roof. Alexander's work consumed him, especially as the fight to save the Detroit factory intensified. Zara found purpose in volunteer work at the community center and in helping her mother through her recovery. They would share occasional meals, making polite conversation about their days, before retreating to their separate spaces. It was during one such dinner, nearly a month after their return, that Alexander surprised her with an announcement. "We've been invited to the Morrison Charity Gala next weekend," he said, passing her a formal invitation. "It's one of the biggest events of the year." Zara examined the elegant card. "Sounds important." "It is. Every major business leader and politician in the state attends." Alexander hesitated, then added, "Victoria will be there." The beautiful blonde who had been so hostile at their first public appearance together. "Your ex." "We dated briefly," Alexander admitted. "It ended badly." "How badly?" Alexander's expression darkened. "She expected more than I was willing to give. When I ended things, she took it poorly." "Meaning?" "Meaning she tried to cause problems at work. Her father is a major investor in several of my companies. She implied I had taken advantage of our relationship to secure his support for certain projects." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "I keep business and personal matters separate. Always. Except when it comes to marrying a stranger to project stability," Zara pointed out. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Touché. But that was the exception, not the rule. So you're warning me that your vindictive ex will be at this gala?" Alexander nodded. "She'll likely try to provoke you. Test our relationship for weaknesses." "I can handle her," Zara assured him, remembering their brief but tense encounter at the charity event. "But I'm curious, if you knew she would cause problems, why did you break up with her?" Alexander's gaze was steady. "Because staying in a relationship without genuine feeling is a disservice to both parties." The words hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Wasn't that exactly what they were doing? Staying in a relationship, a marriage no less, without genuine feeling? "I see," Zara said quietly. "No, I don't think you do," Alexander replied, surprising her. "With Victoria, there was mutual attraction but nothing deeper. No foundation for anything meaningful. It would have been dishonest to continue." "And this?" Zara gestured between them. "What we're doing. Is that honest?" "We're honoring our agreement," Alexander said carefully. "That's its own kind of honesty." It was a convenient rationalization, but Zara didn't challenge it. After all, she had entered into this arrangement willingly, eyes open to the reality of what it was, and wasn't. "What should I wear to this gala?" she asked instead, changing the subject. "Something elegant. I've arranged for several options to be delivered tomorrow for you to choose from." Of course he had. Alexander Reed left nothing to chance, especially not his wife's appearance at an important event. The night of the gala arrived, and Zara found herself standing before the mirror in their bedroom, examining her reflection critically. She had chosen a midnight blue gown with a subtle sparkle that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style that emphasized her long neck, and the diamond earrings Alexander had given her as a wedding gift glittered at her ears. "You look stunning," Alexander said from the doorway, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "Thank you," Zara replied, turning to face him. He was immaculate in his tuxedo, handsome in a way that still caught her off guard sometimes. "You clean up well yourself." Alexander approached, holding a velvet box. One final touch. Inside was a diamond necklace that matched her earrings, an exquisite piece that must have cost a fortune. "Alexander, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for my wife," he said, loud enough for Mrs. Chin, who was passing in the hallway, to hear. In a lower voice he added, "Victoria will be dripping in jewels. You should be equally impressive." Of course. It was all part of the performance. Zara turned so Alexander could fasten the necklace. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. When he finished, his hands lingered on her shoulders a moment longer than necessary. "Perfect," he murmured, their eyes meeting in the mirror. The moment was broken by the ringing of his phone. Alexander checked it, his expression shifting back to business mode. "The car is waiting." The Morrison Charity Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. As they entered, Zara was conscious of eyes turning their way, of whispers following their progress across the room. The newly married Reeds were clearly a topic of interest. "Alexander." "Zara." "Wonderful to see you both," Charles Whitmore boomed, approaching with his wife Margaret in tow. "How was the honeymoon?" "Paradise," Alexander replied smoothly, his arms sliding around Zara's waist. "Though too brief, unfortunately. Business called." "It always does," Charles agreed with a knowing chuckle. "Margaret and I have been married 30 years, and I've yet to take a vacation without my phone ringing." "That's because you'd be lost without work to occupy you," Margaret said dryly. "Zara, you look lovely tonight. That necklace is exquisite." "Thank you," Zara replied. It was a gift from Alexander. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "How generous." Alexander was never one for extravagant gestures in the past. The subtle dig wasn't lost on Zara. "I guess he just needed the right motivation," she replied with a sweet smile. Alexander's hand tightened slightly at her waist, a silent approval of her response. As the evening progressed, they moved through the crowd together, Alexander introducing Zara to countless business associates and their wives. She played her part perfectly, charming and intelligent but never overshadowing her husband. They were at the bar when Victoria made her appearance, stunning in a red dress that left little to the imagination, her neck and wrists adorned with rubies. "Alexander," she purred, ignoring Zara completely. "You've been avoiding me." "Victoria," Alexander acknowledged coolly. "I've been on my honeymoon." Victoria's eyes flicked briefly to Zara, dismissing her before returning to Alexander. "Yes, I heard. Such a rushed affair. One might wonder why the hurry. When you know what you want, why wait?" Zara interjected, linking her arm through Alexander's. "We're very happy with our decision." Victoria's smile was venomous. "Of course you are, dear. A woman in your position would be thrilled with any opportunity to elevate herself." The implication was clear, that Zara had married Alexander for his money and status. "Actually," Zara replied calmly, "I was quite content with my life before meeting Alexander. But when you find someone who challenges you, supports you and sees you for who you truly are, that's not an opportunity you pass up, regardless of their bank account." Alexander looked at her with genuine surprise, clearly not expecting such a passionate defense. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "How touching. Tell me, Alexander, does she know about your arrangement with the board? The timeline they gave you to settle down or risk losing control of certain aspects of the company?" So that was it. The real reason for Alexander's urgency in finding a wife. Not just public perception but actual pressure from his board of directors. "Victoria," Alexander said, his voice dangerously soft, "you should be careful about spreading rumors. Especially ones that could be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate stock prices." Victoria paled slightly. "It's hardly a rumor when your father mentioned it himself at the last investors' meeting." "My father," Alexander said coldly, "should know better than to discuss board matters at social events." "As should you." Taking Zara's arm, he led her away, his jaw tight with anger. "Is it true?" Zara asked quietly when they were out of earshot. "Did the board give you an ultimatum?" Alexander was silent for a moment, then nodded curtly. "They were concerned about long-term stability. Several key investors suggested that my personal lifestyle didn't reflect the family values the company was founded on. So it wasn't just about public perception. You genuinely risked losing control of your company if you didn't marry." "It was a factor," Alexander admitted. "Not the only one, but yes, a significant consideration." Zara felt strangely hurt that he hadn't been fully honest with her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alexander glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Would it have changed your decision?" "No," Zara admitted. "But it would have helped me understand why you were willing to go to such lengths." "I'm sorry," Alexander said, the apology surprising her. "I should have told you everything from the beginning." Before Zara could respond, they were interrupted by the event chairman calling for everyone's attention. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of speeches, charity auctions and polite conversation. Alexander remained attentive, but Zara could sense his distraction, his mind clearly troubled by Victoria's revelations. It wasn't until they were in the car heading home that Zara broached the subject again. How much control would you have lost if you hadn't married? Alexander stared out the window at the passing city lights. Enough to matter. They wanted to split the CEO and chairman positions. I would have remained CEO, but lost my chairmanship of the board. And that was unacceptable to you, Zara stated, not really a question. The company has been in my family for 3 generations, Alexander replied. My grandfather built it from nothing. My father expanded it globally. I've tripled its value in the 10 years since I took over. Yes, losing control was unacceptable. So you married me. Alexander turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. I chose you, Zara. From dozens of potential candidates, I selected you. That should tell you something. What? That I was the most desperate? The least likely to cause problems? That I saw something in you worth building this arrangement around, Alexander said quietly. Your intelligence, your integrity, your commitment to those you care about. Don't diminish yourself by suggesting it was merely desperation that brought you into my life. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. I don't know what to say to that. You don't need to say anything. Alexander reached across the seat, taking her hand in his. Just know that while our beginning was unconventional, I don't regret choosing you as my wife. His touch was warm, his gaze intense. For a moment, Zara almost believed there could be more between them than a business arrangement, that the lines between pretense and reality could blur until the distinction no longer mattered. But reality intruded as his phone rang yet again. Alexander sighed, releasing her hand to answer it. Reed, he said tersely. Yes, I'm aware of the situation. No, that's not acceptable. I'll be in the office first thing tomorrow to handle it. When he ended the call, the moment was gone. They had returned to their roles, husband and wife in name only, bound by contract rather than love. At the penthouse, they parted ways with polite goodnights, retreating to their separate spaces. As Zara removed the diamond necklace and earrings, placing them carefully in their velvet boxes, she wondered how long she could continue this charade without losing herself entirely. Because the hardest part wasn't pretending to love Alexander Reed in public. The hardest part was acknowledging that, somewhere along the way, the pretense had begun to feel less like an act and more like a truth she wasn't ready to face. 2 months into their marriage, the facade began to crack. It started with small things, Alexander working later and later, often not returning to the penthouse until the early hours of the morning. Zara filling her days with volunteer work and visits to her mother, who had been released from the hospital and was recovering well in a comfortable apartment Alexander had arranged for her. They were like ships passing in the night, sharing a home but rarely crossing paths. The distance between them grew even as their public appearances became less frequent. The initial curiosity about their relationship had faded, and with it, the need to constantly perform their roles as the devoted couple. Zara told herself this was a good thing. Less pretending, less lying, less risk of confusion between performance and reality. But she couldn't ignore the hollow feeling that had taken up residence in her chest, the disappointment she felt when she heard the elevator and knew Alexander had finally come home, only to go straight to his office without seeking her out. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Zara had spent the day at the community center, helping with an after-school program for children from low-income families. She returned to the penthouse tired but fulfilled, looking forward to a quiet evening with a book and perhaps a glass of wine. She was surprised to find Alexander home, standing at the window in the living room, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He rarely drank and never on weeknights. You're home early, she observed, setting down her umbrella. Alexander didn't turn from the window. The Detroit factory is closing. Zara's heart sank. He had fought so hard to keep it open. I'm sorry. What happened? The board overruled me, Alexander said, his voice flat. 300 people will lose their jobs by the end of the month. Can't you stop it? You're the CEO. CEO doesn't mean king, Alexander replied bitterly. I have significant power but not unlimited authority. The board vote was 7-4 in favor of closure. Zara moved closer, concerned by the defeat in his voice. What will happen to the workers? Severance packages. Outplacement services. The standard corporate band-aids for destroying people's livelihoods. Alexander drained his glass. It's not enough. Not nearly enough. You did everything you could, Zara said gently. Alexander turned to face her, his eyes hard. Did I? I followed the rules. Played the game. I should have fought harder, found another way. Alexander, you can't save everyone. I should be able to save the people who depend on me, he snapped. That's the point of having power, isn't it? To protect those who need protection. The raw emotion in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the controlled, calculating businessman she had come to know. This was a man genuinely anguished by his failure to protect people he felt responsible for. What about your father? Zara asked. Can he help? He must still have influence with the board. Alexander laughed, a harsh sound without humor. My father was one of the 7 who voted to close the factory. Said it was the economically responsible decision. He poured himself another drink. Apparently the family legacy only matters when it's convenient. Zara didn't know what to say. She had never seen Alexander like this, vulnerable, angry, almost lost. I should go to Detroit, he said suddenly. Tell them in person. They deserve that much at least. I'll go with you, Zara offered without thinking. Alexander looked at her in surprise. Why would you do that? Because you shouldn't have to do it alone, she replied simply. Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or a deeper understanding. Thank you, he said quietly. But it's not necessary. This is my burden to bear. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Zara challenged. Sharing burdens? Even if ours isn't conventional. Alexander studied her face. Is that what you want, Zara? To share my burdens? The question seemed to carry more weight than the immediate situation warranted. I want to help if I can, she answered carefully. That's all. Alexander set down his glass, moving closer until he stood directly before her. Why? Because I can see that you're hurting, Zara said, holding his gaze. And despite our arrangement, I don't enjoy seeing you in pain. Compassion, Alexander said as if testing the word. Not obligation. Yes. Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes, so quickly she almost missed it. Then, to her complete shock, Alexander reached out, pulling her into an embrace. Zara stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the unexpected contact. Then, slowly, she raised her arms, returning the embrace. Alexander's body was warm and solid against hers, his face buried in her hair. She could feel his heart beating too fast, and realized this was probably the first time he had allowed himself to be comforted in years. I'm sorry, he murmured, starting to pull away. Zara tightened her arms, keeping him close. Don't be. This is what people do, Alexander. They hold each other when things are hard. For a long moment they stood there, the rain pattering against the windows, the city lights blurring through the glass. It was the most genuine moment they had shared since their wedding day, perhaps even more so because there was no audience, no performance. Just 2 people finding unexpected comfort in each other's arms. When Alexander finally stepped back, his composure had returned, but something had changed between them. A barrier had fallen, revealing the possibility of a different kind of relationship than the one they had contracted for. I'll make arrangements for us to fly to Detroit tomorrow, he said, his voice steadier. Us? Zara questioned. Alexander nodded. If you're still willing to come. I am. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Thank you, Zara. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they truly shared the bed, falling asleep facing each other rather than retreating to opposite sides. They didn't touch, but the distance between them seemed less vast, less insurmountable. In Detroit, Zara witnessed a side of Alexander she had never seen before. He spoke to each department personally, explaining the situation, taking responsibility even though the decision hadn't been his. He knew many of the workers by name, asking about their families, listening to their concerns with genuine attention. Mr. Reed has always been good to us, one older worker told Zara during a brief moment alone. Not like some bosses who never set foot on the factory floor. He comes by whenever he's in town, knows what we do, values it. That's rare these days. Yes, Zara agreed, watching Alexander across the room, deep in conversation with a group of employees. He does care. And he found himself a good woman from what I can see, the man added with a knowing smile. Someone who cares about people too. Zara felt a pang of guilt at the deception, but also a strange pride in being seen as Alexander's partner in this difficult moment. Later, as they toured the facility that would soon be shuttered, Alexander spoke of its history, of his father working his way up from the assembly line, of his own childhood visits. This place shaped me in ways I didn't realize until now, he admitted as they stood on the main floor, the machines temporarily silent during the lunch break. The work ethic, the pride in creating something tangible, those values became part of who I am. And yet your father voted to close it, Zara said softly. Alexander's jaw tightened. My father changed when we lost Elena. Became harder, more focused on numbers than people. As if protecting the bottom line could somehow make up for failing to protect his daughter. That's not fair, Zara said. To him or to you. Elena's death wasn't anyone's fault except the drunk driver's. Alexander looked at her, pain evident in his eyes. Logic and emotion don't always align, Zara. You of all people should understand that. She knew he was referring to their arrangement, the logical decision to marry for practical reasons despite the emotional complexities it created. I do understand, she said quietly. Better than you might think. That evening they had dinner with several of the factory managers at a local restaurant. The conversation was subdued but not without hope. Alexander had secured promises from several business contacts to interview his displaced workers, and he had personally established a fund to supplement their severance packages. You're doing more than most would, Zara told him as they walked back to their hotel. They see that. It's not enough, Alexander replied, his hands deep in his pockets. But it's what I can do right now. In their hotel room, the tension that had been building between them all day finally surfaced. Alexander stood at the window, looking out at the city where his family's business had begun, while Zara sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. What happens now, she asked. With the company, with the board? Alexander turned to face her. I fight back. This was one battle lost, but the war continues. I won't let them dismantle everything my family built. And us. The question slipped out before she could stop it. What happens with us? Alexander's expression softened. What do you want to happen, Zara? It was a loaded question, one she wasn't sure how to answer. The lines between their contractual arrangement and something more real had blurred over the past days. The comfort they had found in each other's presence, the natural way they had worked together to support the factory employees, it felt like a genuine partnership, not a business transaction. I don't know, she admitted finally. This wasn't in the contract. Alexander moved to sit beside her on the bed, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The contract was just a starting point, a framework. It doesn't have to define everything about our relationship. Then what does? Zara asked, acutely aware of his proximity. Because I'm confused, Alexander. Sometimes it feels like we're just playing roles and other times. Other times? He prompted when she trailed off. Zara met his gaze. Other times it feels real. Like tonight, like when you held me yesterday. Those moments don't feel like part of the arrangement. Because they're not, Alexander said quietly. There's something else. Something I didn't anticipate when I proposed this marriage. What are they then? Instead of answering with words, Alexander reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. Slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. Unlike their wedding kiss, which had been primarily for show, this was private, genuine. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss gentle and questioning rather than demanding. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for a reaction. That wasn't in the contract either, he said softly. Zara's heart was racing. No, it wasn't. Are you upset? She considered the question carefully. No. Surprised but not upset. Relief flickered across Alexander's face. Good. But confused, Zara added. What does this mean, Alexander? For us, for our arrangement. Alexander took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. It means I'm open to renegotiating terms if you are. What terms did you have in mind? Less performance, more reality, he suggested. Less pretending, more exploration of what might actually exist between us. The proposal took Zara's breath away. Was Alexander Reed, the man who had orchestrated their entire relationship as a business transaction, actually suggesting they try for something real? And if there's nothing beyond the arrangement? She asked cautiously. If we try and find we're not compatible in that way? Then we return to the original agreement, no harm done. Alexander's eyes were serious. I would never hold you to more than you're willing to give, Zara. You should know that by now. She did know it. Despite the cold beginning of their relationship, Alexander had always been scrupulously honorable in his treatment of her. He had fulfilled every promise, respected her boundaries, and increasingly, shown her glimpses of the man behind the businessman's facade. Okay, she said finally. Let's renegotiate. Alexander's smile was genuine, lighting his eyes in a way she had rarely seen. Starting now. Zara nodded, her own smile growing. Starting now. He kissed her again, and this time she kissed him back, allowing herself to explore the feelings she had been fighting for weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Alexander's eyes were darker, more intense. We should probably take this slowly, he suggested, though his hand had found its way to her waist, holding her close. Probably, Zara agreed, though part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind. We have time after all. Almost 3 more years on the contract. Alexander's expression turned serious. The contract is irrelevant now, Zara. Whatever happens between us from this point forward has nothing to do with that piece of paper and everything to do with what we both want. It was perhaps the most romantic thing he had ever said to her, though romance had never been part of their arrangement. And what do you want, Alexander? She asked softly. His answer was simple but profound. To know you. The real you, not just the role you've been playing as my wife. And for you to know me, not the CEO, not the businessman, but the man. Zara realized that was what she wanted too, to discover the real Alexander Reed behind the carefully constructed exterior. The man who fought for his employees, who grieved for his sister, who could be vulnerable and strong at the same time. I'd like that, she said, meaning it more than she had expected to. That night, they slept in each other's arms for the first time, not out of passion, but out of a newfound comfort and connection that transcended their original arrangement. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could grow into love if they both allowed it to. As Zara drifted towards sleep, Alexander's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she realized that what had begun as the most pragmatic of arrangements had somehow led her to this moment of genuine intimacy. Life, it seemed, had a sense of irony, bringing her closest to love through a marriage that had started without a shred of it. The journey ahead was uncertain. They would face challenges as they navigated the shift from a business arrangement to a real relationship. But for the first time since signing that contract, Zara felt truly hopeful about the future. A future that might include not just financial security for her mother, but happiness for herself with a man she was beginning to see in an entirely new light. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, some of the best love stories did begin with disgust after all. Not because disgust transformed magically into love, but because seeing beyond first impressions, beyond facades and defenses, allowed two people to discover what was real, what was worth fighting for, beneath the surface. And if there was one thing Zara had learned about Alexander Reed, it was that what lay beneath his controlled exterior was a man worth knowing, worth understanding. Perhaps even worth loving.